Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and in this video I'll be showing you the process behind these roses I've been working on in PROCREATE on my iPad. I will also be including some common mistakes people make in the sketch phase of their drawing and what you can do to fix them, and any tips that I think might help you with starting a new drawing. So I'm going to start off with just a pencil brush in PROCREATE, and I have the Photos app open in another window so that I can look at this reference photo I made in Photoshop. Really easy. It just helps with being able to gauge the proportions of everything and just makes for a very quick reference. As you can see, when I paint, I like to gauge where in the canvas is the subject matter taking up space, so I almost like box in the perimeter of what I'm painting. So I did those lines on the top and bottom to get the correct height for this painting. I also blocked out the roses and their proportions using boxes. Now, everyone has their own method for sketching and drawing things proportionately, but from my experience, I feel like I am able to better gauge what I'm drawing correctly by using very quick and intentional lines. Oftentimes when people first start out drawing, they try really hard to get the details right off the bat. The first thing they go to is try to draw the details. And really what you want to do is kind of counterintuitive. You want to try and get the structure correct before you try adding any of the bells and whistles later on. You will often see this happening with portraits. When people try drawing faces, they'll render out a really glossy, detailed looking eye, but it's in the completely wrong spot on the face. And that usually happens when people, instead of creating structure and using basic shapes before they build upon a drawing, they just go straight to the details because in their mind, it's like, I want to draw realistically, so they go right to the details first. Now, another common thing people do to try and draw realistically, people will try to draw the silhouette of something or use very organic, soft lines. And there's nothing wrong with trying to look at the outer edge as a reference for the proportions that are going on in a drawing, the space it's taking up in the composition, things like that. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's, of course, nothing wrong with using soft lines. There's plenty of times where you need to do soft lines. But what I mean is, for instance, if you're trying to draw someone's hand, and instead of creating a hand shape from basic shapes first and carving out the details later, they go right to trying to render out all of the soft lines around the perimeter of the hand. And now there are some people that can draw like that, and it's totally fine, and they have practice with doing that, but I often find that it makes it harder for people to visualize what they're drawing as a 3D object, or even just looking at what they're drawing on a piece of paper as a 3D thing. And it oftentimes can just end up flattening the image, and it can also make the perspective a little bit wonky. So there's nothing wrong with, of course, drawing like that, but just keep in mind, if you're working on something that's giving you a hard time, try to break it down into basic shapes before trying to render out the silhouette exactly as how you see it. Because if you think of it, really, those soft lines are based upon the structure that's underneath. It's kind of like putting fabric over like a table, right? The table is going to create a rectangular structure underneath, and instead of just going in and drawing the perimeter of the cloth with all the soft lines and how it's draping around, put down a rectangle first so you can have a reference point to build those soft lines off of, is what I mean. I hope that makes sense. And what I'm doing here is I just lowered the opacity on the rough sketch I first started this drawing with, created a new layer, and I'm just creating some cleaner line art on top of that. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's really just there to be used as a guide later on when I start shading as I paint each of the petals and things like that. Sometimes when we get a little happy with blending in a painting, right? I know I'm not the only one. Sometimes you just want everything to be super smooth, and then before you know it, the edge of one of the petals that you're painting is not at all where it's supposed to be. That's why I always keep a simple line art layer on top that I can turn on and off, just to make sure I'm not over blending and moving things around without knowing it. As you can see, when I first start blocking in the shadows and highlights and things like that, it doesn't look cute, doesn't look sharp, but I basically just map out where the darkest darks are, and I go from there. Usually the way I work on a painting is I like to just map out the darkest darks first and have a basic guide for the value range in the subject matter. And then in this case, for instance, after doing that, I just focused on one rose at a time. You don't have to work this way. You can just work on the whole thing and render the whole thing as you go, but I'm the kind of person where I like setting mini goals for myself, and I find that when I do that and then I achieve them, it encourages me to keep working, and I end up getting a lot more done that way. And I end up becoming a lot more focused on my work when I do that. And yeah, so if you're like that and you like seeing progress happen, I really suggest thinking about working on your pieces like this, especially if you're an impatient person. Really. You don't want to feel discouraged. If you're a patient person and you're like, yeah, I know this is going to take me this long and I'll get to this level of detail in this amount of time. If you're cool with that, then that's totally fine. I'm the kind of person that is like, I want to see progress happen, and that personally motivates me to keep going. So yeah, just a thought. Just like a brain hack, I guess. I don't know. Something I would like to mention is I didn't do the highest highlight, like the brightest highlights, when I blocked out the values and contrast of this painting beforehand. I like to just have a basic contrast range of shadows when I am first rendering out and blending the subject matter. And then at the very end, that's when I really push the sharp highlights. And then I also go back and look at any of the shadows that might need to be a little bit darker, a little bit more enhanced, and just go from there. In these screen recordings, you can see a little bit better what I mean. After getting the overall value range in the painting, I went back in and looked at all the points of the roses where there would be really, really dark shadows, and I'm just cleaning them up a little bit, blending them together with a little bit more detail, making some areas darker, things like that. And here is the part that really brings your drawing or painting to life. I'm going back in with almost white, not completely white, but almost completely white. And I'm adding some sharp highlights where it would naturally occur in the petals. And this just really sharpens the image up so much. It is definitely worth waiting to do at the last moment. And yeah, it's you know, when anyone that wears makeup, you know what I mean, after you did a full face of makeup and you put the highlight on your cheekbones, and you're just like, yes, it is the cherry on top. That is what I mean. That is the same feeling. And here's what that process looks like zoomed out. As you can see, the heightened contrast, it just makes a huge difference. Now you might be thinking, you know, you're using digital media, like why didn't you just go in Procreate and select curves and just up the contrast? Well, that's because there are points in the painting that needed more detail, but it was within the highest point of the highlights, so it's makes all of the difference if you go in manually and use that really high level of highlights to create the more minor details in the petals, some of the ridges going on. You couldn't achieve that with just using the curves option, so I just wanted to throw that out there in case people were wondering why I didn't do that. And here is what the painting looks like. I'm going to add a lot more to this painting, so stay tuned for future videos and tutorials. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't like it, then give it a thumbs down. And comment below if you have any suggestions for future videos you would like to see from me. I'll see you next week. Bye!